Okay, good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, everyone, depending on where you are in the world. Welcome to today's webinar, Putting BEAD to Work, brought to you by WBBA and broadcast by Informer Tech Target. My name is Alan Bresnick. I am Principal Analyst at Heavy Reading, and I'll be your moderator today. We have just a few announcements before we begin. This webinar is designed to be interactive. The dock of widgets at the bottom of your screen will allow you to learn about today's speakers, download resources, share the webinar with social media outlets, and participate in the Q&A session at the end of the webinar. The slides will advance automatically throughout the session. You can download a copy of the slides using the resource widget. Towards the end of the webinar, we will ask you to complete our survey found on the right-hand side of your screen. Please take a minute to fill this out before leaving us today, as your feedback will provide us with valuable information on how we can improve on our future events. Lastly, if you're experiencing any technical problems, please click on the Help widget at the bottom of your screen or type your issue into the Q&A area, and we'll offer one-on-one assistance. Okay, so now on to the presentation, Putting BEAD to Work. Joining the discussion on topic today are all these speakers that you see here. We'll be starting off with Evan Feinman. Evan is Director of the Broadband Equity, Access, and Deployment Program, the U.S. Department of Commerce, and TIA. We also have our speakers, Kevin Hasley, who's VP of Strategic Initiatives at Ookla, Stephen Wilson, Senior Principal Analyst at Omdia, Thomas L. Tyler, who is Deputy Director of Connect LA in the state of Louisiana, Jim Stritzinger, who's Broadband Director of South Carolina's Office of Regulatory Staff, and finally, Brian Allenby, who's Senior Director of Program Operations at the Maine Connectivity Authority. So thank you all for joining. We have a great crew of speakers today, so I'm going to get right to it. So the agenda today, first we're doing our welcome and introduction. I'll share a little bit of research that we've done at Heavy Reading about the digital divide. Then we'll get into the BEAD program status. We'll have our panel Q&A, which will take up the bulk of our 75 minutes. We'll field your questions near the end, and then we'll have our conclusion. So without further ado, let's get into it. Talking about the digital divide, we're sizing up the digital divide. As you can see here, about 7.5 million U.S. households still lack access to broadband service, according to the latest version of the FCC's National Broadband Map. That's down about 15% from 8.8 million unserved or underserved households 6 months ago, and down 37% from the FCC's National Broadband Map a year and a half ago. Despite this growth, rural and exurban areas still have less broadband coverage than urban and suburban areas, which is what we're going to get into in our discussion. So here's a little bit of research that we did. It's getting a little old. It's from late 2022, but I think it's still relevant. In the survey, we asked service providers about their views of the digital divide and plans to address the problem. The data here is a bit tricky because it can be read two ways, sort of like a glass half full and glass empty. On the one hand, 44% of service providers report that that rural areas account for more than a quarter of their digitally disadvantaged homes, and 17% say that rural regions account for more than half of their digitally disadvantaged homes. But on the other hand, though, 56% of providers report that rural areas account for no more than 1/4 of their unserved, underserved homes. So contrary to popular belief, the digital divide is not just purely a rural issue. There are plenty of suburban and even some urban homes that are also unserved or underserved. Okay, so now let's bring in Kevin Hasley from Ookla, who's going to run through a few slides that Ookla has about the digital divide and how it splits up among the states. So Kevin, thank you for joining us, and please take it away.
Thank you, Alan. Yes, I'm Kevin Hasley, VP Strategic Initiatives at Ookla, but I'm also the Broadband Advocacy Chair in WBBA. So WBBA is a great organization, the World Broadband Association. We focus on the global impact of fiber across the globe. So Ookla came into the company as a founding member, came into the association to spread the message about the lack of fiber, lack of broadband across the rural areas, across urban, just like how Alan said. And so what we did is we took all that information that we collect. Ookla collects speed information. If anybody ran a speed test, you know who Ookla is. That's our company. We have 18 million samples per day coming into our organization, and we dissect them and provide insights on the impact of broadband across the country. So what this map is showing you in an animation form is take the FCC allocation of 120 and see which one of the states in the areas can meet that needs of just what today FCC's broadband definition is. And as you can see, as we go through the animation, and this is all available on ookla.com, so you can feel free to go in there and browse yourself. But you see there is still a huge missing opportunity for people to actually just get sustainable broadband information. And so broadband speeds 120 for today's trends of applications is well suited for certain applications, but when you start getting into the new advanced applications, it's going to make or break certain things that people can do on the internet with those speeds. But they're good for today, but will be good for the future. It's still TBD. So let's dig into this a little more. So like I mentioned, Ookla provided this report that just launched most recently about how the 50 U.S. states stack up in broadband speeds. And there's a lot of good information and a lot of particular information that's really relevant for this conversation because there is still a digital divide across the U.S. It's very surprising in 2024, we still have this digital divide, and it's really it spared the need of why BEAD is so important, why giving subsidies for consumers to actually get that connection into their homes because of what the wealth of information is provided to them and what they can do on the internet, from education to just to work daily or spend the money for shopping. The revenue generated, it is very critical for we fix this digital divide across the U.S. Some of the leading states, though, is very surprising of how fast they are. It could be of areas of deployment, which we'll talk about a little later for our panelists, but leading states are connected, North Carolina, Delaware, Maryland, New Hampshire, Rhode Island, Tennessee, Utah, and Virginia. You don't see some of the biggest states in there. You saw some of the smaller states that are leading the broadband speeds, and that's just because, you know, the smaller compact states could be easier to deploy, or there's many other factors. But, you know, most of these states have allocated BEAD funding. They're putting in place some of those necessary funds to invest towards infrastructure. So even with that, the number one slot was 65% of speed test users receiving minimum broadband standard. That's good, but it's just 65. There's much more work ahead that's needed to be done. So what we see, and we're continually mapping this as Ookla, mapping the speeds, mapping the performance, and feel free to go to ookla.com and subscribe. The BEAD funding isn't expected to really impact broadband deployment projects until 2025 at the earliest. So there's lots more work to be done. And speaking of that, we need to make sure that we're allocating the funds necessary and allocating funds in the right areas, right? Focus on the areas that are the lowest of the percentages. Like Washington, for instance, on your screen here, 61% in urban is good, above 50%, but 28% rural. We need to start addressing this where the numbers are starting to go higher than 50%. So BEAD funding is designed to close the gap between those with and without access. So there's been a lot of work so far, but again, hopefully with the new administration and the new focus, that we still continue building out. And again, very excited to hear from the panelists on how that's going to work. But many states have a prominent gap between the number of rural and urban residents that have access to broadband. So we need to address that and fix this. And Ookla spends their time trying to dissect all of this and give that information out to everyone who needs it, all the states, so they know for a fact what consumers are experiencing in real world and real time. So I want to pass it back to Alan.
Okay, thanks very much, Kevin. Thanks for giving us that background. So given the size and extent of the digital divide, what is the U.S. government and the states trying to do about it? Well, we're going to get into that a lot, but let's do a quick overview here. The U.S. government is now doling out $9.2 billion from its Rural Digital Opportunity Fund, or RDOF, to spur broadband deployment in rural and exurban areas, with up to another $11.2 billion allocated for subsidies. The same time, a whopping $42.5 billion is on the way from the newer BEAD program. We'll hear a lot more about that in just a minute. The U.S. Treasury Department's Capital Projects Fund program is shelling out another $10 billion for broadband projects around the country, and other federal and state government subsidy programs are gearing up as well. Okay, so that does it for me and Kevin. So let's now turn to our keynote speaker, Evan Feynman, Director of the Broadband Equity Access and Deployment Program at the U.S. Department of Commerce, National Telecommunications and Information Administration, NTIA. Well, okay, that's a mouthful. Evan, we're really pleased to have you here, so please take it away.
Thanks, Alan. I'm really pleased to be here, and I agree that is a long introduction, but one that I appreciate, and certainly the agency's doing a lot of really great work, and so always proud to be here to represent it. The BEAD program is, as you mentioned, the largest telecommunications infrastructure program that was created as a result of the bipartisan infrastructure law. It is a $42.45 billion program that is designed to ensure that we get an affordable, reliable, high-speed internet connection to every single American home and business that lacks one. This is really important. We have the opportunity to fundamentally change the nature of their engagement with our economy, with our society, for millions and millions of American families. And one of the things that I think it's really worth talking about before we get into the specifics of how the program is working is exactly the impact that we're talking about delivering. When you think about communities that don't have access to an affordable, reliable, high-speed internet connection, what we're really talking about is long-term outcomes for that community and individual day-to-day lived experience for those families. And so thinking about long-term outcomes, we know that communities that don't have access to ubiquitous broadband connectivity are not going to see their populations increase. They're not going to see their economies grow. We know that kids that grow up in a household that doesn't have access to a high-speed internet connection have lower GPAs. They're less likely to pursue post-secondary education. And when they do, they take on more debt and attend a less good institution. Elderly folks are less safe. They're less able to age in place there. They're more likely to enter long-term care sooner. And when they do, that has significant impacts on both their household and then ultimately the public finances. Access to healthcare broadly is negatively impacted without access to telehealth services. And so there's a really, really, really tremendous incentive for us to solve those problems. And by doing it in this way, we are going to generate tremendous new economic outcomes. We're going to generate an unbelievable amount of wealth for Americans who are going to see their property values increase. We're going to see new business opportunities emerge. And I'm really excited to be a part of that. The BEAD program as it stands right now is on track and is going to be successful. We are moving quickly, but we also need to get it right. Over the past couple of years, as you mentioned, thousands of homes and small businesses have been connected to high-speed internet services for the first time. Across the administration, more than $65 billion have been allocated for high-speed internet projects through the Rescue Plan and then the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law. More than 45 states and territories have projects under construction right now. And NTIA has recently announced, with the approval of the final state, the state of Texas's initial proposal approval, that all 56 state and territories now have the first key step in their effort to make the BEAD program reality approved. And so all $42.5 billion have been obligated to the states, and the states are ready to get to work making it happen. We have also seen every single state open up its challenge process, and it's important to talk about what that is. So the bipartisan infrastructure law required that states generate a plan to do a number of things, but critical in that plan is two big items. The first is that they will conduct a challenge process, which is the methodology by which states and territories take the FCC map and then they ground truth that map in the lived experience of their citizens, and they apply their own policy lenses to what connectivity means as they understand it. Those processes have been undertaken, as I said, now by every single state and territory in the union. Millions and millions of data points have been evaluated, adjudicated, and validated. And that's the first step in determining which areas truly need connectivity and making those areas eligible for the second big part of what states are going to do, which is what's called subgrantee selection. Where we are right now is NTIA has obligated the funds we have made grants to all 56 state and territory governments. Those are the only grants NTIA is ever going to make. Those state and territory governments will then, according to the plan that they published in their initial proposals, they will take in applications and make subgrants to serve in public-private partnership every single one of those locations that they identified in their challenge processes as needing either an improved or the existence of a high-speed internet connection. What we have going on right now is that one state has concluded and posted for public comment its subgrantee selection. That's Louisiana. We're really excited about that. And we're going to get their final proposal, the detailed accounting of the manner by which they intend to serve all their unserved locations and underserved locations here soon. And then another 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11. This is up to the minute data. 11 states have their subgrantee selection process open. Those states are a real cross-section of the nation, stretching from Delaware to Washington, Louisiana, up to Montana and North Dakota. There's a tremendous amount of activity that we're seeing coming in. In every state that we've seen for which we have data, more than 90% of broadband providers in the state have been participating in the program. And in some states, it's approaching 100%. So we're really excited to see the private sector embracing this opportunity to deliver that affordable, reliable, high-speed internet connection to every single American home and business. One of the things that I want to emphasize right now is that this is a program that differs from prior federal efforts in two critical ways. The first is this is a state-led effort. While we have created a set of guardrails within the rules here at the federal level about how this program will work, it is states who decide both what pathway they will take between those guardrails, from we still have some folks who need internet connectivity to everybody's got a connection, and the speed at which they navigate that. It is reasonable for different states to approach those in different ways, and that's one of the key aspects of this program. A state like Louisiana that wanted to go very quickly, and they're joined and followed by other rapid moving states, Nevada, Delaware, West Virginia, Montana, can do so. Other states that want to be more deliberate are also certainly welcome to do so within the confines of this program. We're excited to work with them as they navigate those challenges. The other thing that I want to say is we've got a real opportunity now in the coming year to make this project real and see shovels get in the ground in months, not years. We're excited to see that happen. And what's really going to be important is that we continue to spread the word, and we emphasize that this is a program that's keeping its eyes on the horizon. Federal grants and the federal government are complicated animals. There's no way around that. But this is a pragmatic effort that is focused on getting it right and meeting both states and industry where they are so that we can get this done for the people. And we are going to continue to accommodate, to learn from what we see happening out in the world and feedback that we get. And then we will flex within every boundary that we're able, right? I mean, I can't change the law. That is for Congress to do. But up to and within those confines, if there's something that's going to create a good outcome for the American people or for an individual state, that's what NTIA is going to do. That's what we've pledged to do. And I'm excited to join some folks who I know are really creative thinkers, deep thinkers about this, as well as strong implementers in the form of our state broadband partners to talk about it here with you today. And so I don't need to take up a heck of a lot more time. We've got some great questions to talk about, and y'all have the opportunity to hear from some really talented folks. And so I'm happy to get right into the panel discussion.
All right, thanks very much, Evan. It's glad to hear that Texas has joined the list of states that have gotten approvals for their funding. So great. So yeah, we do have lots to cover here. So let's get into our panel discussion now. Here's the first question up, should be up on your screens. Where do the states stand with BEAD and BABA right now, and what's the timeline? So let's turn to our state broadband directors and see who wants to go first. Thomas, Brian, Jim, which one of you'd like to speak first?
I'll jump in right off the bat, and especially kind of drafting off Evan's comment. Can you guys hear me okay?
Yeah,
yep. Yes.
You're good.
Oh, awesome.
Yeah, we hear you, Jim.
Well, first of all, good morning, everybody from the East Coast, South Carolina of the United States. And it's a pleasure to be here, especially with my colleagues that we love. I think one of the things that's really cool inside baseball stuff is the state broadband directors. We're all really good friends, and we're also competitive. We love to jab each other in the ribs, and we started a little bit of that banter early on. Evan tries his best to keep us all mitigated, but we have a great time. And one thing I wanted to say right off the bat is BEAD is extremely exciting, but putting it in context, I like to think of the relay race in the Olympics. And one of my favorites is a 4x100. I love to see the super fast guys and girls make their way around the track. And I think it's important to think about BEAD as being what I would call the final leg of the race. You know, you always put your super fast sprinter in there, and the goal is to get to the finish line. And we all want internet for all. We want every home, business, and community anchor institution connected. But the reason I say it's the final leg of the race is there's, really several other federal programs that were designed and articulated to work together to get us to the finish line. The Federal Communications Commission has their RDOF program. The USDA has their Reconnect program. We've had other state resources in play. And so a big takeaway for this audience is to understand the interplay of all three of those. And BEAD is designed to get us off the finish line, or get us over the finish line, getting everybody. But we've made incredible progress in South Carolina with our American Rescue Plan investments. And although we've been going slower with our BEAD program, it's by design. And that's one of the things we love about NTIA is they've worked with us to be very flexible and creative. But, there's other federal timelines involved. The American Rescue Plan dollars are required to be committed by 12/31/2024. And any dollars that we don't get committed revert back to the federal government. So it's been a front burner thing for a lot of states to get those dollars out the door, and we've done a great job. So we're going slower with BEAD, but it's by design. In fact, Evan, if you remember, I volunteered to go last. and they've allowed
you were not the only one. You were not the only one who was asking to move to the bottom of the pile.
Yeah.
So we did what we did for you, Jim.
But I think that's really important, and that's what I'll leave out. But I think that's a great place for us to start, is understand that all of these federal programs have been working together and rocking and rolling to bring internet to all, and it's been an exciting time.
Okay, thanks, Jim. Thomas? I'm sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, so first off, thank you all for having me on. It's great to join this discussion, especially with all of my respected colleagues that are on the call as well. I can very easily say that Louisiana never volunteered to be last on anything, Evan. So we're happy to lead the pack and be the test case for everybody to ensure that we're doing it all correctly. Obviously, as Evan alluded to, our final proposal that details all of our subgrantee selection process, as well as the subgrantees that we chose through our competitive process, is out for public comment right now on our website, connect.la.gov. That's out for public comment until, I believe, next Tuesday, and we'll quickly digest those comments and submit all of that. sure that we all are on the same page with our process. And so, our office, we've said this for a while, but it's becoming not true anymore. We were a younger broadband office. We were really founded and started the creation of our grant programs back in March of 2021. We quickly were approved for our American Rescue Plan CPF dollar program. Those projects are, vastly completed. I think we're at 60 or 70% completion on those, with the vast majority of them being completed early next year. So we're excited about that. That has connected an additional 60,000 Louisiana households and businesses to high-speed, reliable, affordable internet over the last 2 years. So super excited about the providers that participated in those programs and the work that they've done throughout the state. With that being completed, we moved quickly into the planning for BEAD. We were the first state to have our initial proposal approved last December, which meant that we were the first state that needed to submit our final proposal. So we quickly decided that we needed to ensure that a competitive and engaging process was out there for our internet service providers to go in and say, okay, here's the last locations that we need to serve with our program. So I think we have a bunch of other questions related to this discussion that we can kind of go into more detail on, but that's essentially, where Louisiana stands right now. We're kind of the marker for how these programs work so far. We were very pleased with our results, and we'll continue to ensure that we're moving as quickly as we can to get broadband to all of our residents in a timely manner.
Okay, thanks, Thomas. Brian, where does Maine stand?
Yeah, thanks to WBBA for having us on today, and looking forward to a good discussion here. And I would say in general, we're probably somewhere between Louisiana and South Carolina. We have opened our BEAD subgrantee selection process. We've completed pre-qualifications. The application itself will open in January. And I think, Jim, to your point about other funding sources, ARPA, CPF, et cetera, I think it's a critical point, right? And I think we were talking about this last week. We could not have simultaneously deployed all these funds in any sort of semblance of an order or an efficient way. And so we're really looking at this, to use another sports analogy, and Evan, you might have coined this one, so I don't want to take credit for it, but we're looking at BEAD as our cleanup batter, right? This is our number 4 batter here. Who's going to come up and hopefully hit a grand slam for us. The one other point, and I thought you were going here, Evan, earlier, I've heard you make this point. I think it's really critical for folks to understand BEAD is inherently different. All of these other funding sources, ARPA, CPF, SLRF, RDOF, we were working from a baseline and working up, right? And so we can use numbers like Maine has connected 86,000 homes and businesses since 2021 through those programs. With BEAD, we're working to get to 0. And this is a fundamentally different approach that requires a fundamentally different kind of program in administration. We are working to get to no locations. And so it really speaks to the importance of things like the statewide challenge process, to have a clear baseline of data so that we understand what getting to 0 actually means. And so I think a lot of the, go ahead, Evan.
Yeah, Brian, I think that's a really important point, is that not that any of the earlier programs were simple. Like, it's never easy, right, running a broadband grant program. But it is easier to say, all right, I've been given $50 million. Folks, send me projects, and I'm going to award the best ones, the most efficient ones, until I run out of money, right, and narrow the digital divide. But it is another thing altogether to scope the entire thing and then in one fell swoop finally close this problem. But it is necessary that the last step be taken in this way. And one of the things that I think people don't always remember is, you can, if you chip away at the problem, in fact, make it worse as opposed to better. And so if you imagine, a county with 100 houses in it, 50 of them in a town, and then 50 scattered around, and say it's $100 to connect everybody in that county. Well, if you're just trying to get it, if you're just trying to make progress, you might have an ISP come to you and say, well, hey, I'll connect those 50 that are in town for $25. And you go, oh, that's great, right? If you think about it for a sec, you say, oh, well, what an efficient choice. The problem is it's still going to cost $100 to hook everybody up. And by spending $25 to connect those 50, you've made the business case for the remaining locations much worse, because it's still going to be $75 to pick up that remaining 50 locations. And so it is really important that we recognize that distinction between what BEAD does and what the programs that have come before do.
To Evan's point, that was a key concern that Louisiana shared when we started the design of our BEAD subgrantee selection process. We knew, based on the way that CPF had been designed and the way our program was designed, that providers inherently cherry-picked the most affordable locations that they could serve at the least amount. And so by design, if we were to apply that same methodology to BEAD, we would be unsuccessful. There are, when we ran the numbers originally, there was, I think, around 10 or 15% of our locations throughout the state where even with a 100% subsidy to providers, it still wouldn't make financial sense for them to go after them. So that being said, we took that information and we designed what we called sub-project areas. Every state seems to have a little bit of a different flavor of this, different sizes, different complexities, or guidelines on how they've been designed. But what we took it and wanted to make sure that the project areas we were designing could stand on their own. They would capture the interiors of small towns, like Evan mentioned, but also go out and grab some of the more rural areas where it might be more expensive for a provider to serve. And so we believe that methodology worked very well. And I'll share some more granular data on our results on one of the next discussion questions. But we were pleased on the response to that process and how providers used it to their advantage and to our advantage to serve all of the locations.
Okay, great. Thank you all.
Go ahead. I just wanted to add one more thing. Just coming back to the flexibility, the pure magnitude of dollars that each state invested in their different programs was very different. American Rescue Plan dollars, both SLFRF and CPF, the South Carolina General Assembly had latitude to use that money because keep in mind, we're coming out of COVID. So each state used their dollars a little bit differently. So in South Carolina, we had $400 million of American Rescue Plan towards broadband, and other states did not do that much money. So again, back to our huge tribute to NTIA and appreciation for the flexibility that they've afforded each state. And I think a key takeaway for the audience is understand we're working within a common federal framework, but we've been extended the ability to be as flexible as we need to be to solve our state's problems. So again, our thanks to Evan on that.
Okay, thank you all. Let's move on to our second question, which is how could the BEAD and BABA programs change under the incoming Trump administration, and how might the technology mix change? This is a little bit of a hot potato, but let's see who wants to handle that. Evan, can you shed any?
Yeah, well, I'm happy to say
insight on that.
A tremendous amount of what we have done within the context of this program is written into the law, and so unless Congress sees fit to change the law, those statutory provisions will remain. It's also worth noting that while there are some who have argued fairly or unfairly, y'all can guess where I would come down on that, that it took us too long to get to the starting line. The starting pistol has fired. There are nearly a dozen states now that are already accepting applications, which means that the private sector has now spent millions of dollars scoping, engineering, preparing, and submitting applications for this program. And what we're seeing is that, in state after state after state, very high percentages of ISPs are participating in the program. And so, it has always been a part of this program's design that it was going to last quite a while. That doesn't mean that it's going to take a very long time necessarily for states that want to move quickly to begin construction, but that, there will be an oversight period. There will be many, many years hence in which we're making sure that the taxpayers got what they paid for. And that was always going to last in a new administration. And so there was no reason to believe that there might not be changes coming forward. That said, I have every reason to believe that the team that's going to come in over at the Department of Commerce are serious-minded people who are dedicated to getting good outcomes for the American people. And when we have the opportunity to walk them through, which we haven't yet, all of the progress that we've made in this program, and when they have the opportunity to hear from the states, about the tremendous progress and opportunity that's really immediately before us. I mean, in some states, I was just down in Mississippi. They're going to open up their portal here in weeks, not months, and there are many states right on that or near that time frame. And so, I look forward to working with the new team, and I believe that they will be very pleased once they see where this program is.
So you're not concerned that BEAD will be killed or be scaled back?
I think that's very unlikely.
Okay. Anybody else want to jump in on that one?
From the perspective of the state of Maine, we're moving forward, right? This is a program as Evan mentioned, we have invested a lot of time and energy here. Our partners, our ISP partners, our community partners, and so we're moving forward. And if changes come, we will deal with them in stride. But we are not stopping. We are not pausing. There's been a lot of momentum, and again, building on those other funding programs. I think there's an appetite, right, to get to work here. And I think it goes back to whether we're looking at it from a state level or a federal level or a county level or a municipal level. This is a bipartisan issue that has broad support across all of the people, certainly in the state of Maine and nationally. So we're rolling on is where I'll leave ours.
Okay. I've also heard the argument that red states are going to benefit more from this than blue states, and also that the new vice president is a big supporter of BEAD. So those should be good signs for BEAD.
Yeah, I think, speaking on behalf of South Carolina, I just say we're rocking and rolling. We are, my good friends Thomas and Brian, just our three states as exemplars are very creative. We each have to respond to the geography in our own state. Different technology mixes make sense in different parts of the United States. And again, back to the flexibility we have with BEAD to approach things, but we use, low Earth orbit satellites when it makes sense. I have some barrier islands. In fact, I'm going to one later this afternoon. That's a perfect use case for low Earth orbit satellite, and BEAD allows that flexibility. We're doing tons of fiber, but we feel like we have the flexibility on a technical perspective to do what we need to do. And I feel good about it, and we're not holding down, and I'm sure Thomas isn't either.
Yeah, I mean, look, like I said, and I'll share I think in the next discussion, more of the granularity of our results. Our office, our partners at NTIA, our providers in the state, our administration here in the state is very pleased with our results. We have a lot of investment that's coming to Louisiana over the next few years to get this done. A lot of businesses here in our state are going to be impacted positively by this. Not only the ISPs and their contractors who are going to be building the networks, but also small businesses throughout the state, the residents throughout the state, who have never had access to high-speed, reliable, affordable internet before. And so, our governor is proud of the work we've done. Our administration is happy.
Thomas, we lost you there. Okay.
Can you hear me? Our administration's happy with the progress we've made, and so we're going to keep moving forward.
Okay. And I did, Alan, I did see a question come in about BABA. What is that? That's Buy America, Build America, and yes, it's a requirement of the BEAD program to use American-made fiber, American-made electronics, things like that. So, I think it's healthy for the United States to lean on that, and we look forward to it.
Thanks for pointing it out. Yeah, I should have explained what BABA was, so thank you for getting to that. Okay, let's move on to the next question, getting more granular about it. How will the states distribute BEAD funds to service providers? What's the process, and when does it start?
So,
I'm sorry, I lost you.
I'd love to. I'm sorry about this mic. I don't know what the deal is. So I'd love to kind of address this one basically because we've done it already and our results are, pending approval. But To take a step back, our process started with the challenge process that Evan alluded to, where we started out with about 205,000 locations that we thought were going to be eligible. We ran this last fall, and by early spring, we had a result of around 140,000 broadband serviceable locations that would be eligible for the BEAD program. We took those locations and put them into unique sub-project areas across our state. There were about 1,800 sub-project areas total, ranging from as small as 2 locations to as large as, say, 600 locations, all with the idea that each should be able to stand on its own from a business case with a positive NPV for providers to look at. What we also did that some states are doing, some are not doing, is that we established reference prices for each of these sub-project areas on what the state thought it should cost to go to these locations, basically giving a general idea to all of the providers that this is what we're looking at when it comes to serving the locations. So all the providers had this data early summer. They started to work on what their projects would look like throughout the state. We opened up our grant round in August of this year. And we received a ton of different bids from all sorts of different providers. And what we kind of built was a 2-round process, really what amounts to a modified reverse auction, because we didn't want to go all the way to the bottom where someone would bid themselves to the point where they couldn't build the network. But we also wanted to make sure we were getting the best bang for our buck. So after the first round, we were able to award 19.
Lost you again, Thomas.
Yeah. So we were able to award 19 locations after our round 1. This was very amazing to our office to even comprehend. What that meant was that almost every single location had received some sort of bid and would move into our round 2. We like to equate it to round 1 was the round of greed, let providers come in and see how much they can win. But round 2 was really the round of fear. People logged back in and saw they hadn't won anything, and they really had to put pen to paper again and come up with their best and final offer to the state. Between round 1 and round 2, the price to the state actually dropped by around 20% on average across all the applications we saw. And what that resulted in was a very competitive and efficient process from our perspective. At the end of round 2, we had around 10,000 or so locations that were left that we had not awarded yet, that we moved into our direct negotiation process. And these were mainly because they had been deconflicted out. Someone had tried to apply for those locations, but they maybe got beat by somebody else on another set of their project, and those locations weren't able to be awarded. So the vast majority of the locations that hadn't been awarded were ones that providers were interested in. So we opened that up. We let providers submit a request for how much they wanted to spend on those locations. And so we ended up with awards to almost every single one of our locations. There's about 2,800 or so that are still pending a low Earth orbit satellite bid. But the vast majority of our locations, about 137,000 locations, now have an active award or a provisional award that's been tied to them. To go into more detail on what that looks like, out of our $1.35 billion allocation that we received, about $750 million is tied to the deployment side. So 56% of that allocation was basically spent on deployment for BEAD. Out of that, 95 or 96% of these locations are fiber to the home locations, with 90% of the infrastructure being buried underground. So when you take a step back and look at the full numbers on this, we're looking at around a $5,300 cost per passing on average across all of the locations in the state for the amount of money we spent. So we were very pleased with these results. I think that our program, obviously I'm a little biased because, it is our program, but I don't think we could have run it more efficiently than we did. We ended up with a result with a lot of money left over for non-deployment uses, the other piece of BEAD that we can use a lot of this funding for. And I really do think that we spent our money wisely on these locations to make sure that all of them were covered with some sort of technology for, to finally close that digital divide in the state.
That's very impressive, Thomas. Anybody else want to chime in on that one? Okay.
I don't think we have any numbers that are going to compete with Thomas's yet. We're looking forward to opening our application process in January. I think speaking to it in a larger sense, there's going to be a process of collecting those applications. To Thomas's point, we are trying to make this as user-friendly as we can to maximize the participation and drive as much competition as possible in that process, and then move as quickly and efficiently as possible through negotiations, making those provisional awards, really thinking ahead and starting a lot of the work on the final proposal now, so that when all that data is in a place, and Evan, give you and the folks at NTI a shout out of giving us the data schemas for the tables that we're going to need in 5 months. Things like that really help us accelerate our work, right? So we're building the tools and processes in a way that simplify. And then really, one of the hallmarks of all of Maine's programs have really been kind of taking a user-centric approach. So working with our partners, whether it's communities, whether it's ISPs, to help them through the process. So as we think about something like BABA, as we think about NEPA and EHP permitting, really trying to get ahead of these elements and providing proactive, comprehensive support and working with the subgrantees so that none of those become the holdup, right? The last thing we want to do is delay shovels in the ground for any one of those reasons. And so our goal is really to minimize the amount of time between the provisional awards, the final proposal, and when these projects actually get started. I think this is one of the benefits in Maine is that it's a relatively small ecosystem. 90% of the pre-qualified applicants are entities we've worked with in the past through other grant programs. So when you know the person you can call, when you know that the compliance and reporting person or the permitting person or the technical and engineering person at the ISP, it really does help increase that efficiency.
Okay, thanks, Brian.
One of the things we continue to reiterate to states as we share these results with everyone, we had a conference right before Thanksgiving to really share it with a bunch of key people who, were interested, and we're continuing to share results with states that want to kind of learn more from our methodology. But the competitive nature is a necessary requirement to this. The more people that you can have to offer states bids, the further down the line you're going to get. And it really just builds out the available projects that a state has to choose from and that a state has for each to compete against each other. So I think that was a key hallmark of our process. We were very open. We wanted people to be able to participate in almost any case. And so that was key to the participation and the result we got. And just to share, one more quick stat, 70% of the awards we made were to Louisiana-based companies. So, and that was kind of a welcome surprise to us. I think that some of the larger players may not have been as aggressive as they thought they might need to be, but a lot of the providers, who are Louisiana-based were participants in our first round of grants. To Brian's point, we've worked with them before. They understand how to participate and execute on federal programs like this. And so that was a welcoming surprise to us to see such a high percentage of the work actually going to Louisiana-based companies who have Louisiana-based contractors. It's very huge for a state that's, historically a more poor state. We've got a lot of rural areas, a lot of unserved areas and communities. And so it really does help to drive the workforce development piece here in the state as well.
Yep.
Okay, thanks.
And the only thing I would add, just so you have the South Carolina piece.
Sure, Jim.
South Carolina is currently in the pre-qualification mode. So similar to going to a silent auction, you have to sign up to get a paddle. Every state had to do that as well. And Maine and Louisiana are ahead of us in that. But we're in the middle of pre-qualification right now. And we're expecting our subgrantee selection will start in the month of February.
Okay. All right. Thank you all. Let's move on to our next question. I want to bring Kevin and Stephen back into the discussion. How are providers doing with delivering broadband connectivity to customers today Kevin, I think you have some stats on that from Ookla's research.
Yeah, so I just want to make it sure we've been talking about the government side and the BEAD and BABA, but I want to just talk about providers, ISPs. So what we're seeing in the States is even though there's still a digital divide, it's been closing really rapidly. And if you see the success of 5G rollout and the timing of 5G rollout, I've been in this career for so long that I've seen the transition from 2G, 3G, 4G, now to 5G. The time to get 5G rolled out to consumers is miraculous. It's very fast. And to actually start closing the more critical areas of rural and urban, it's been closing as well. So if you looked at the charts that we shared before, you start seeing that a lot of usually the lower performing states like Connecticut, North Dakota, Delaware, New Jersey are starting to perform better, starting to close that digital divide, starting to match the 120 requirements from SCC. And so what you do see, though, is the other states that still has a broad range of country that is not inhabited in. So like states like Montana and so forth, less than 40% of those speed test users of Alaska, Montana, Wyoming are receiving the minimum broadband. They are receiving some broadband, that's where the critical areas are, but you're seeing that change as well. And to Thomas's point, one of the things that we're seeing the benefits of all the BEAD funding is the smaller ISPs coming out, building new networks, building WISP, wireless ISPs, and other technologies into mix that allows us to get that broadband information out a little wider. And that's really good to see, especially from the Build America, Buy America, is where those American companies are coming in, those Americans ISPs coming in and actually putting out the competing performance providers for consumers that compete with the big three carriers.
Okay, thanks, Kevin. Stephen, you have more of a global perspective on things. What are you seeing in terms of how service providers are delivering broadband connectivity?
Yes, I think I could provide an international perspective here. So I'm in the industry analyst covering everything broadband really for Omdia. Right. So I think various ways of addressing this at the national level, I suppose, in the first instance. So if you look at in aggregate broadband performance in the US, speeds pretty good really by international comparison standards, and that speaks really, I think, to how cable networks have done a pretty good job, at least on the downstream side. Yes, there are countries that have higher average speeds, but the US doesn't do too badly there. I think the difference being there's a lot of cable compared to whereas in Europe, certainly there's still a fair amount in a lot of countries of legacy DSL around. So that's one difference, and there the US fares quite well. We also see one of the things in the US that's a bit different is that you've had much more rapid adoption of XGS-PON. So the latest FTTH technology really, which is giving you shared symmetrical 10 gigabit per second capacities. Now in the US, there are reasons why operators would deploy that first. You don't want to deploy GPON and then face the cost of swapping out that ONT later. So providers prefer to go to 10 GPON, XGS-PON earlier. And what that means is you see the proliferation of multi-gigabit access offers that is much more developed in the US than it is in many European countries. So the US is doing quite well in terms of the availability of the latest fiber technologies and all the benefits that can bring. I think the US also well placed when we sort of get into upgrades to technologies like 25 GPON. I would anticipate the US to be at the front of the curve there. Where perhaps there's more work to be done on a national level, and this doesn't necessarily pertain to sort of government-funded rollouts or partly government-funded rollouts, is just in terms of overall fiber to the home availability compared to other developed economies. So in the US, we're sort of a little bit over 50%. In some of the other countries in Europe, you're pushing up to 80, 90% already. So there's more work to be done there. But I think in general, in many cases, there is a strong business case for purely commercial investment in more fiber to the home in the US. Of course, we are seeing that. We've seen announcements, say, from AT&T yesterday. There's going to be a lot more wholesale-only networks as well. I think that can be a good model in the US as well. And I think BEAD and other programs can be a nice complement to that. So I think we're in an age of abundant fiber rollouts in the US, and that, of course, may pose some challenges as well, which you can maybe talk about. But I think generally that is the area where there's probably still most work to be done.
Okay, thanks, Stephen. Let's move on to our next question. Getting back to the states, how are states working to create a more competitive broadband market with BEAD? Who wants to start us off on that one? And what's the strategy and what's working, what isn't?
Yeah, I mean, I can certainly kind of speak to that because we had a I know you had mentioned earlier RDOF, so we had a really big proliferation of RDOF locations here in the state. It was like $165 million that went to a bunch of different providers that are actively building out. We've had a lot of state level committee meetings, kind of almost oversight meetings to make sure that the RDOF providers are doing what they need to do here in the state and not planning any defaults. We really kind of started those earlier this year to prepare for the BEAD dollars. And so we had that. We have our Gumbo grant program from the round one CPF dollars that, has also built out around the state. There's a lot of different providers that have won both grants and are using each other to build, to help build and get as far into the state as possible, and are also going to use BEAD dollars to help finish out those areas. Well, but there's a lot of areas where they move right up against each other. There might be an RDOF winner on one side of the street and and one of our CPF grant round winners on the other side of the street. So naturally, the competitive aspect in these rural areas grows, where you traditionally might have seen a legacy cable provider and maybe a provider like AT&T offering DSL services in a rural community. You now have fiber providers and maybe multiple fiber providers that are moving into the area to compete. So naturally, that draws a bigger competitive process, and we will continue to see that as we start to build these BEAD networks. There were some questions that came in, specific to the state. Our breakdown of percentages across the state, we have, like I said, 95% fiber to the home, and it was around 0.5% cable. So there was a few cable providers that amounted to a couple hundred locations that are going to receive some service or receive some funding for service. And then
Lost you again.
2% fixed wireless, and then 2% left over for LEO providers. And then the vast majority, like I mentioned, 70% of this is going to Louisiana-based companies, some of which have had a presence for a while. Some are larger RDOF winners, but the traditional national players like AT&T, Comcast, Charter, Cox also won some funding for our program as well. So again, very excited about the spread on how these projects were awarded and the funding that went to each of the entities that we have.
Yeah, thanks, Thomas. Jim or Brian?
I was going to just follow up on that. I think really from our perspective, it's doing two things. One is being as welcoming as we can to providers and applicants of all types, right? There's a whole piece in the BEAD No Phone and the final proposal about what kind of alternative providers can you bring into the mix. And so really trying to create a program where we are open-minded about what that looks like, and giving, not reducing barriers where we can, obviously within the scope of the limitations that are on us, but really trying to bring as wide of a pool to apply for BEAD. The other thing I think is important to keep in mind, and see a question in the Q&A here, about larger companies versus smaller, making a push to contribute to BEAD. I think one of the important things for states to keep in mind is that these larger ISPs that operate nationally don't have unlimited capital. And there is a match requirement, and every one of the states needs to be thinking about how do we ensure that any national ISP is prioritizing our state for investment, because it is unrealistic to expect, if you take $42.5 billion and 25% of that is 10 and change, right? 10 and a half. There is probably not that much private capital at those ISPs to bring to bear. So they're going to have to make some choices too. And so one of the other approaches to make a more competitive BEAD process for us, it's making Maine more attractive to those providers. And I think that's a really, it's not, as a state broadband office, we can't just operate in a vacuum and say, well, we'll tell you the rules and we expect y'all to come to the table and play ball with us.
Yeah.
Yeah, we are competing against each other, essentially, states for provider interest. And it's fortunate that NTIA, in the guidance that they've provided us, has given us a lot of different tools in the toolbox to help make that happen. I mean, one of the key ways that we're looking at doing it, and I think Brian is doing it in Maine, is in relation to fixed amount subawards. And so, you know, what you will see is a continuum of states where, you know, it's the easiest to get paid for the work you've done, and it's the hardest to get paid for the work you've done. And obviously, a provider with limited capital resources is going to want to build as quickly as they can and get their money back as quickly as they can. And so you'll see states that, you know, have easier requirements or requirements that are in line with the tools that NTIA has, you know, guided us with, be maybe more successful than some other states.
Yeah. And the only thing I would add to this, kind of agree with everybody, but one of the things is, first of all, the BEAD program has embedded within it a low-cost plan. So I know we were all mindful of making sure that the consumers at the end of the day have an affordable service to work with. But the BEAD program is not designed to create competition. You know, this whole notion of enforceable commitments, you know, the federal government doesn't want to drop one ISP on top of the other. So we're all carefully managing geography. And I think all of us think of our state as a chessboard. And what we've done in South Carolina is to make certain that no one provider has too big of a bite of the apple. We don't want to create large monopolies in the geography. And so we think long-term, having tighter geographic boundaries is really nice, because if one player ebbs and flows or isn't as successful, then another player is going to move in. So having tight geographies is a good deal. And Kevin Hosley, one thing I wanted to point out is we actually were successful in flipping the digital divide in South Carolina. And per your data, we actually have a negative score now, which I was really happy to see, because that means we've actually got faster rural speeds than we do urban speeds now. And we're really excited about that.
Well, congratulations on that.
Could I just add one more on this? And I think, you know, we've talked a lot about alternative technology and really in probably a pretty binary framework, right? Of, is it going to get wireline, fiber, HFC, or is it going to get alternative technology through BEAD? And I think if we took a step back, even from, you know, the competition that's being directly funded through BEAD, it's important to note alternative technologies are a crucial part of driving a competitive marketplace with resilient and redundant service, right? That provides so much value. So I think it's, as we look at it, and Thomas, you know, speaking, I know the consortium that won a large portion of the grants, and T-Mobile was a part of that, and they got those points because they're also contributing to your cellular infrastructure in the state, right? Which can lead to fixed wireless service or improved fixed wireless service, not through direct BEAD deployment. So I think it's really important, as, again, I think this is the chessboard, Jim, right? We're trying to think about how all of these complementary pieces, all the tools in the toolbox, work together to provide that competition.
And just one word from my side about sort of, again, a more global perspective. So I think one thing to note is that wireless technologies can fall within the remit of government-funded investment in Europe and elsewhere. So there are examples of that. I think in Europe it will depend on what's there already in terms of the capability of existing networks. If there's one or less networks capable of providing 100 megabits per second, then there are some rules that might allow funding of wireless technologies. Although bear in mind there is a commission target for gigabit per second availability across the whole of that region by 2030. But I do think wireless technologies have a role to play, including LEO. I mean, if you look at what we're seeing in terms of real world performance, you might be seeing sort of download speeds of a couple of 100 megabits per second. Yes, upload speeds are considerably lower in the low tens of megabits per second, but the performance is still pretty good. And I agree wholeheartedly with the point that those technologies themselves, even if they're not selected, can provide important infrastructure competition. I think in Europe it's probably a little bit different the way it works. It's sort of wholesale, and bitstream access is kind of mandated where there's this state aid, but definitely different models. And we heard about some of the infrastructure competition that's resulting from BEAD. So different approaches, but I think the role of wireless technologies is interesting, and I think they do have a role to play going forward.
Thanks for that perspective, Stephen. And I agree with you, especially that LEO is going to be more important, especially given Elon Musk's position in the new administration. But that makes me jump one question into this next question: is what types of new broadband networks or technologies might we see with BEAD funding? Are we going to see more wireless now? Is it going to shift from the concentration on fiber to seeing more wireless funding instead?
Well, I think it's important to be really clear that, the BEAD program arms the states with the flexibility that they need as it's designed now, as it's being implemented now, to serve their communities with the right technology for the right location. That is the key way in which it's designed. We're not putting our thumb on the scale at NTIA. The statute required that we design kind of the optimal or priority project. And, to fulfill that mandate, we said, as we look at it right now, a fiber connection is the best connection. It offers the longest scalability over its lifetime that we can see from where we sit. But states set themselves the threshold at which they must opt for the priority project or not. And that threshold is set at the state's discretion and can be statewide or regional. And so, at the end of the day, BEAD is going to fund a lot of fiber, a lot of wireless, and a lot of, licensed and unlicensed, and a lot of low Earth orbit satellite connectivity. And it's not going to be the federal government that makes those calls about what goes where. Rather, it's going to be up to each state. And, one hopes, and I'm very confident, I know the folks that are on with us today, those state directors are going to be in close dialogue with both the industry and the local governments and tribal governments that they're seeking to serve. Because, the closer you are to the problem, the better you are equipped to speak to what your specific needs are in a community.
Okay. Thank you, Evan. Anybody else want to get in on that?
Love to. Evan knows I'm exploding right now. This is one of the real beauties of the BEAD program. And I'd like to say there's really two swim lanes of funding. There's the deployment swim lane, which is for homes and businesses, but there's this non-deployment swim lane where we can do all sorts of super creative stuff. And what I'm really excited about is we probably are only going to have around 27,000 or so locations when we actually get started with BEAD. So we're going to have a lot of money potentially to invest in resilience and to get our backbone right. And we're calling it the Resilient Resource Network, and we're looking to invest, possibly several $100 million in a backbone to really get, the resilient rings we need to drive AI, possibly quantum, and some other things. So my brain is exploding with ideas, and we've been super excited that NTIA has given us the ability to explore those concepts.
Okay, thanks. Anybody else?
It's maybe slightly tangential, but worth mentioning again something from Europe. So within sort of what's permitted under state aid, there are voucher schemes which are in effect subsidies of retail broadband plans using next generation technologies. So in countries like Greece, Cyprus, Italy, there have been schemes that are subsidizing retail broadband plans to encourage adoption of those technologies that have been rolled out, may have been rolled out with government funds as well. And that's to encourage the adoption of that next generation access infrastructure, the actual usage of it. And I think maybe the results are a little bit mixed. but certainly if you look at Greece and Cyprus, those are quite sizable programs actually, and they have, I think, made a difference in terms of the adoption of those technologies. So yeah, I mean, there can be measures on the demand side, and I'm sure, you know, there are ways in which that sort of thing are addressed in BEAD as well. But yeah, demand side measures can be important too.
Stephen, I think that is such an important conversation, and Evan, I don't know who you want to give credit to at NTIA for originating this, but BEAD without the equity is bad, right? And so both from a technology perspective, right, as we're thinking about that, but really about like there's this whole other and give a shout out to NTIA for the Digital Equity Act funding, right? Also in bipartisan infrastructure law, using these funding sources together, right? It is crucial that we provide the skills, that we provide the devices, that we provide the affordability so that people can demonstrate the demand and so that providers want to come to these places and build, right? So I think it's a part of, you know, when we look at our non-deployment funding, it's really driving that, right? It's what are those economic drivers that we can drive demand to make the rest of the BEAD deployment that much more economically viable and really maximize that impact.
Let's talk about the question that came in regards to the bucket between deployment and non-deployment, because I know I alluded to it earlier, and then we kind of dived into the discussion. I know we have a few minutes left because I could have an entire webinar on non-deployment and what we're doing here in Louisiana. So really the way BEAD works is that you have to suffice the needs of deployment first, which is serving all of your unserved, underserved, and community anchor institutions in that order with high-speed, reliable, affordable internet. If you're able to do that and still have funds left over, there's a laundry list of items in the BEAD NOFO that you're allowed to spend funding on in relation to non-deployment, from everything from cybersecurity training to telehealth considerations, all sorts of different things that, and really a lot of it is kind of at the discretion of the states with NTIA approval. And so with Louisiana expending 56% of their BEAD funds on deployment, we have 44%, give or take, left over that we can spend on the non-deployment side.
Lost you there for a second, Thomas.
Yeah. Each state will be different because each one will have to have a certain amount of money to spend on deployment. But that speaks to the need to run a competitive process if a state wishes to have maybe more funding left over for non-deployment usage.
Okay. We don't have a lot of time left, so we have a lot of good questions coming in, but I'm just going to conclude with one quick question for each of you. In 10 words or less, where will you stand a year from now with your BEAD program? Who wants to go first?
I don't want to put a percentage out there, but we should have 15 to 20% of our locations probably connected.
Okay, 15 to 20%. Okay, who else?
Well, I think we will have, oh, go ahead, Brian.
All right, Jim, go for it.
I was just gonna say, we're rapidly approaching the end of the digital divide now with our ARPA money. So I think we're gonna be doing great. I think we'll have our sub-recipient selection done, and hopefully we'll be moving forward on some of our non-deployment deployment projects, our Resilient Resource Network.
Okay. Proposal approved, 100% of awards through contracting, about 50% of them through permitting, hopefully. That's where we're hoping to be.
Okay. And Evan, nationally?
It's going to be varied across the states, but, you know, undoubtedly a year from now, we're going to see shovels in the ground in a significant percentage of the states. We're going to see final proposals from all or nearly all of the states. And so we are going to know with a high degree of certainty exactly what projects are going to deliver that affordable, reliable, high-speed internet connection to every single American home and business. And we're going to see construction underway across the nation.
Okay. Stephen, you want the last word on the global perspective, where you think things will be a year from now?
Yeah, well, I think we're moving, I think, in Europe into a phase where more of the rollouts are concentrated in rural areas. A lot of the countries have quite substantial coverage already. So lots of the same issues, a big focus on rural broadband. And we expect the continuing migration to the next generation PON technologies, as we've already seen really in the US. We'll see a lot more XGS-PON in Europe over the next year.
Okay, great. Well, clearly we needed more time than 75 minutes, but thank you all for this discussion. Sorry we didn't get to all the questions, but we'll be sending the questions to the speakers so they'll be able to reply to them. So let's give everybody here a big round of virtual applause today. Thank you to WBBA as well as to all of you out there for attending. We appreciate your attention and participation. Within the next 24 hours, you should receive a personalized follow-up email with details and a link to today's presentation on demand. Please feel free to invite your colleagues and peers who may not have been able to attend the event to follow that. This webinar is copyright 2024 by Informer Tech Target. Presentation materials are owned or copyrighted by NTIA, Ookla, Omdia, and Heavy Reading. The individual speakers are solely responsible for their content and their opinion. On behalf of all of us here and the WBBA, thanks for attending. Stay safe. Have a great day and happy holidays, everyone. We'll be back with more in the new year. Take care.